right.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So we start each of our meetings with public audience. So we've got a couple of members in our audience today, and I just want to ask if anybody would like to speak.
I didn't come prepared.
That's okay, you don't have to talk. You can also listen, but I just want to open up the floor. Okay, we have no public audience. We can move on to our next agenda item. So we were originally going to start with our conversation that we left off with from last time regarding section 502. But Bob's not here yet, so we need to wait because, but we just received a large package from Bob with the legal research that we had asked him to do. It's in front of each of you. Franklin emailed it about 40 minutes ago. So none of us have had an opportunity to read this. So we will get to that when we get to when Bob arrives. Is that fair? Okay. So we will finish the town manager section after he gets here. So our next item is the Board of Selectmen. So Franklin was kind enough to print out everything for us again with regard to all of the public comments. And so like last time, I know Paul, it was painful to watch, but we went through each paragraph.
I had you right.
I couldn't think of anything better than
Oh, here's Bob. Okay.
Hello.
Select person Antonio brought us pizzas.
Wow.
There's pepperoni, cheese, and gluten-free.
You want a whole pizza?
And do you want a few minutes to collect yourself because you're first on the agenda? So I don't want to hit you when you're walking in. You ready to go?
Do I understand that a member of the Board of Selectmen provided us with free meals on the night that we're going to discuss the powers and
But it's
role
under the
of
monetary threshold of,
And it's fully disclosed.
and it's fully disclosed.
I am not for sale.
He's
Have another
disputing
piece.
me.
Yeah. What slice would you like? So Bob, we were going to first discuss in the town manager section, section 502 was our, where we wanted to combine pretty much B, C, D, and E, right?
Yeah. I mean, almost got rid of 503.
Go back to my notes from that meeting. So what we had wanted input on was we started questioning whether we wanted to move B to a different section, and then we started going down this road of D and E became, do we need to ask Bob? And then 503, we wanted to combine them, and Bert had provided some language possibly to do this, but we wanted to get your legal opinion on what needed to be included or what we could combine. And then the other question we had was under E was regarding the collective bargaining agreements, because that's been brought up in previous conversations, and that does not address that, and we don't know how to word that because, or potentially add something there regarding the Board of Selectmen participating in litigation or knowing about it, because
Well, talking about 502E,
502B,
B.
we wanted it to tie to section 4 is what I had in my notes. We want that to tie into when we talk about the Board of Selectmen, so we can come back to that conversation. C, we were just changing reference to section 614 instead of 615 because it was referencing the wrong section. And then D and E were questions for you
Are they redundant?
Are they redundant? Do we need both of them? And how do we incorporate collective bargaining agreements if we want to do that?
But also, section C is very similar in its subject with section 503A.
A, right.
And so I propose that we
We did-
essentially expand 502C and eliminate 503A,
And we didn't know if we needed them both for a
or
reason.
maybe 503A and B.
I had A and B.
Because we were keeping C in 503.
Right.
Modifying it,
We just modified a couple words in it and capitalized a few things.
yes.
Well done.
Do you have a copy, Bob, of the charter with the commission's proposed changes thus far? Cause I have an extra copy.
If it was attached to the agenda, I have it.
Oh, is that?
That's what
It was, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it was on the second page of the minutes.
No, but also,
In like in the,
And then
Yeah, it's
it
actually,
was-
yep,
yeah.
I put in the
you
charter
put it in
again
the
with all
charter.
the comments. I maybe didn't need to include the entire thing, but
Franklin's back to his tiny
When
print.
would you share it with me?
it's
It's online?
it's in the agenda that's posted for the charter revision
Okay.
commission, yep. If you go to their page and go to May 20th agenda in the
Just hand that back to her.
Okay, all right, thank you.
She can follow along.
So I'm unclear what you wanna do with 503A, B, and C.
So 503A and 502C are redundant, we think. And one of the proposals was to combine 503A into 502C.
right. I didn't bring that language with me, but I did email it to you, Bob.
I've got it on my phone.
When did we do that?
Last week.
So they essentially say the same thing. Is working fine.
Yeah, well, so I can explain what I had in mind, because there is a difference between administrative officers and employees, and that difference appears in the later sections of the charter, where the administrative officers can be a defined term, because they're identified in I forget if it's section 7 or section 8, and the employees are something else. And so I propose revising 502C, maybe I'll find my copy as well. That's okay.
I think 502C does incorporate your language.
in what you gave
Commissioner
us.
Halpin. Yeah, so if you look further in your packet, the town charter has all the comments, and those are the proposed language changes and the discussions we had with as comments, and any strike throughs or any omissions or anything we wanted to take out, I did a red strike through, and anything we wanted to add, I did blue text. And I think that's incorporated in 502C.
No, I sent in some additional language.
I see, sorry.
I don't wanna hold up the whole meeting.
No, that's what, we wanna finish town manager section, so.
That was C, we could do D. That was the question of the overlap.
So 502C is proposed, you eliminate the need for 503.
A.
Hey,
I don't see a problem with it.
Do you want me to read the?
Yeah,
The
it's a good
language?
idea. It's a good idea to read the whole language.
Sorry.
Certainly more
This is the
effective.
new language.
So proposed section 502C, okay? The town manager shall have the responsibility for developing position descriptions for all administrative officers, subject to the approval of the Board of Selectmen. The town manager may appoint and remove administrative officers in accordance with the provisions of Chapter 7 of this charter. I had to do my Roman numeral math. With the exceptions identified in this section, all advertising for, hiring, and dismissal of town employees shall be under the town manager's direct control, subject to the approval of the Board of Selectmen and the provisions of Chapter 9 of this charter. Appointment and removal of officers and employees of the police department shall be governed by the provisions of Section 614 of this charter, and appointment and removal of education employees should be governed by the provision of Chapter 170 of the general statutes. And then the definitions that Bert had proposed for administrative officers shall mean that the officers identified in section 701B of this charter, and that individuals who hold such additional offices as may be created by the Board of Selectmen pursuant to 701A of this charter. Position description shall mean any of the statements defining the responsibilities of town employees that have been or are to be adopted by the Board of Selectmen pursuant to section 901 of this charter. And town employees shall mean the individuals who hold positions for which position descriptions have been created pursuant to sections 901 and 902 of this charter.
Sounds good to me.
That's what you wrote.
Nicely done.
Is there a reference to 707 also? Is that
Yeah,
earlier?
that's what I was asking.
No, because I don't think 707 applies.
I only see it was there before, but
Yeah.
I'm looking at.
because it applies to the police department.
So that new 502C, you would eliminate 503A.
A.
That's basically duplication.
So basically merging the language of the two and
Right.
defining it more and putting it in 502C, eliminating A. So then 503B, when we go through it, becomes A. And C becomes B. And C, we've already discussed the changes. And in B, we referred to section 701B regarding administrative offices. I think that was the only thing we discussed in that section, but I think we got tired at that point. That was the end of the night. So that leaves E regarding contracts in 502. And our big question there was collective bargaining.
Well, collective bargaining is
And litigation.
governed by MIRA. Municipal Employees Relations Act, which preempts the charter. So you don't have to reference specifically collective bargaining in the charter because it's covered by MIRA.
But I think what came up from several of the selectmen were concerns that the town manager was doing the collective bargaining agreements and the selectmen basically don't know anything about what's going on until it comes to them for a vote. Am I correct in
So-
summarizing that?
Prior to the president administration, the way I heard it is the town manager would come to the personnel committee and get some parameters on what was our strong needs and where we had room, we felt to give a little, and sort of outline where we wanted the negotiations to go. With our existing town manager, it's just been customary and no one's ever reproached it, so it's not like he's doing something he shouldn't be because he's never been told otherwise. He comes to us with a completed TA, tentative agreement, and it's basically blow it up or accept it. So instead of having any input into the nuances, we are literally blow it up or accept it, and that is really what we were trying to stress, Chair.
Okay,
Is to sort of have some preliminary discussions as he enters negotiations, not to actively participate in the negotiations.
so my question, and
It's pretty typical to have that initial meeting prior to the start of negotiations.
If it doesn't need to be in the charter, a lot of this is stuff that, what I've taken away from these meetings is we have a lot of housekeeping to do ourselves.
I don't
And
think
if
it,
this is one of those things, then by all means,
in my view, it doesn't have to be in the charter.
That's right.
okay.
It could be even a resolution at the start of the collective bargaining process prior to any subsequent negotiations. The manager shall meet with the board of selectmen to obtain and develop bargaining parameters for the upcoming negotiations.
Do you think it would be
So-
appropriate for personnel or the board? Just so I further understand.
Probably personnel subcommittee would be the best place to do it.
so what, the way this is written,
This is a labor contract, so.
but it says the approval of
Any
Board of
contract.
Selectmen are subject to such other limitations that are contained in the charter and journals, and may enter into contracts or agreements, but it doesn't say may enter into negotiations, contracts, and agreements. Is adding the word negotiations?
Well, these contracts referenced in 502E does not include collective bargaining agreements.
Because of this other
Because of
statute, okay.
Well, this also says United States government
Yeah.
or any
Yeah.
agency therefore
Yeah,
thereof, the state of Connecticut, or any agency, political it sounds like this is separate from
yeah, I don't see
labor
502E
negotiations.
as including labor negotiations and collective bargaining agreements.
Right, do we have anywhere in the charter that talks about labor agreements and the first selectman or the board of selectmen? I don't recall seeing anything currently in there. I remember seeing it in other charters, but not this one.
Yeah, I don't think it is, because again, it's covered by MIRA and it's governed by state, the whole process is covered by state statute. More so with the Board of Ed than with towns. Even with towns, the collective bargaining process is a function of state law. And no, you can't override that with a charter revision. Not to say you couldn't have charter revisions to talk about the local process, but I don't think it needs to be in the charter. I think it can be Board of Selectmen resolution or ordinance. It feels more like a resolution than it does an ordinance, but it's not necessary for it to be in the charter.
Just to be clear, there would be nothing in the MIRA that would prevent the Board of Selectmen from exercising the kind of authority that the selectman was describing.
Right, well,
And that would not violate anything in the current charter as well.
no, MIRA says that there has to be an exclusive bargaining agent for the employer, and that's usually the chief executive or the recruiter designee. But that doesn't preclude a town from, prior to the initiation of the collective bargaining process, to set some overall parameters, such as, we've got budget constraints this year, we really need to keep raises to a minimum, we really need to do something about that provision that requires us to pay 4 hours of overtime for a 10-minute call, that kind of thing where the Board of Selectmen, from a policy perspective, would say, here are the things that we would like you, exclusive bargaining agent, to focus on.
Well, what if the charter were to designate the Board of Selectmen as the bargaining agent and state further that it could delegate responsibilities to the town manager.
I would have to check that because I've never seen that done. Legislative body, bargaining. On the Board of Ed side, the Board of Ed has more of a role in collective bargaining than on the town side. But that's something we could look at, what are the parameters of doing
In the
so.
sense that, you know, a union will be a designated bargaining agent and appoint an attorney to represent them. And that way it would be clear that it's the Board of Selectmen that has the ultimate voice in this process.
Well, that's true because they have to approve a contract at the end of the process. I think Steve is saying, given that they have to approve it at the end of the process, they'd like to set some parameters going into it.
Yeah, well, that's,
And don't get
That's the
something.
idea.
that was a concern I have as well, is that they shouldn't receive a fait accompli from the town manager. They set the
It would almost
priorities.
fit in 502 as a duty of the town manager to consult with the Board of Selectmen prior to initiation of collective bargaining agreement negotiations. Making it a duty of the town manager to come to the board and say, hey, what are your goals and objectives in this next round of negotiations?
Well, now that Paul has pointed out that subsection E is really limited to contracts with governmental bodies,
that's the way I read it.
maybe we should add a section for contracts in general. For example, I mean, the town has just entered into a couple of contracts with, you know, to buy property and
Right.
such, and include collective bargaining agreements and prescribe that kind of initial consultation.
Well, I mean,
Bob, I have a question. In Canton's town charter, they, under their section, labor agreements, it says the first selectman or his or her designee shall negotiate the labor agreements for employees under the jurisdiction of the Board of Selectmen's budget. So that's one way that they did that. They made it very clear. One sentence, boom, here it
Yeah,
is.
but what does it mean to
but the Board of
negotiate
Selectmen's
under
not
the jurisdiction
negotiating,
of a
it's the
budget?
town manager who's
It means all the
responsible.
employees, it means all the employees under the town's budget.
Oh, I see what you.
So, I'm sure somewhere else in here it excludes the police.
And Board of Ed.
And Board of Ed.
Well, if this contract section just refers to government agencies or the state of Connecticut agencies, okay? There's other contracts that the town enters into, as you mentioned, for property. They may enter into a contract to settle
services.
litigation.
Yeah.
Contracts for collective bargaining. There's other contracts for like purchasing contracts
There's all
and
sorts of contracts, yeah.
third-party contractors that we hire
So
jobs
can
out
we
to.
just eliminate whatever it is that limits the scope of E and just say contracts as on behalf of the town?
Well, technically speaking, once the budget is adopted, the appropriations are made for any given area, it's really up to the chief executive to enter into contracts and agreements to carry out that budget.
Mhm.
I don't know that it would be appropriate for the town manager to have to bring every contract before the Board of Selectmen for approval, so long as the contract is within appropriated funds. It's usually a core function of the administration to do that. And that's why there's this carve out for contracts with other governmental agencies. The general rule is the contracts, unless they're multi-year, entered into pursuant to the approved budget or the functions of the town manager. And that, you know, that's a daily practice. I mean, you know, copy paper, I mean, there's all kinds of vendor contracts.
Kevin wanted to say something.
Thank you, if it's all right with you, just to, from my perspective here, I do think that some of what we're discussing involves the relationship among the policymaking board and its hired employee and the manager, and that relationship is part of what we're trying to discuss and you're trying to codify. And at the risk of sounding smart by agreeing with our town attorney, I don't wanna necessarily see that we overly encumber through the charter how all the necessary details and process needs to cover. It doesn't change the fiduciary responsibility and the responsibility of the Board of Selectmen and anything that will add to this, and it may actually unnecessarily overly encumber the process if you try to insert overly specific language in the charter itself. That's just my perspective on this. I think that some of it can be dealt with in clarifying the roles, like you're already talking about, and what the town manager is responsible for and how the board oversees them.
And again, I think it would be up to the Board of Selectmen itself, right? As you say, you don't want them involved in decisions to buy copy paper. But if someone's going to buy a piece of property next to the high school, then the Board of Selectmen can provide specific instructions about how it wants the contract to be negotiated.
Land acquisition has to go to the legislative body and disposition.
But, okay, so that's, I didn't realize that, but if it's not land acquisition, but it's still something that's important or a significant dollar amount, presumably the Board of Selectmen can proactively intervene in the process and say, this is how we want this contract negotiated.
I think that's always the case.
Yeah.
Under the general power to supervise and direct the town manager. In terms of litigation, that's covered in the town attorney section of the charter. Every settlement has to be brought to the Board of Selectmen before it's finalized, and we routinely do that.
Well, is that true of settlements of suits against specific commissions or boards such as
Zoning.
the zoning?
Zoning, no,
Litigation?
because again, that's a carve out
Right.
for the zoning function under Title VIII. But if it's a negligence action, workers' comp settlement, tax appeals, tax foreclosures, all of that, every form of general litigation that isn't land use appeals, that's governed by Title VIII, all come before, under the section of the town attorney. I can't settle a case unless the Board of Selectmen approves it. There are no exceptions to that. So that form of litigation comes. The special form of litigation, which are land use appeals, because the Board of Selectmen has no role in the zoning function, planning function of state law, there's no ability for the Board of Selectmen to have input into the settlement of those appeals. Not that they can't be consulted,
So,
or notified, or, a big project's going on in town, and it's usually, if it's denied, there's a zoning appeal, and as the process goes, there's some effort to resolve that. That's governed by state statute, how you go about doing that.
it sounds like we're asking first, do we need a special provision for contracts and more general than the one in subsection E? It sounds like we generally do not, because the Board of Selectmen already has the power to regulate that process
Yeah.
in the way it does. And with collective bargaining agreements, that's probably the case as well, that the board can be as aggressive as it wants to be in supervising the town manager. Land acquisition is already covered,
Yeah.
and so with litigation, the town manager raised an important point, which is that those zoning cases get settled without the input of the Board of Selectmen or the town manager. And in some cases, the town might work out a deal, a better deal, or one earlier in the process if those parties got involved. And the suggestion was somehow at that meeting was maybe we could revise the provisions relating to the Board of Selectmen to give them some kind of zoning responsibility that would overcome the privilege issue.
Right, and we looked into that, and we determined that under current state law, there's no ability to make the legislative body the final zoning authority. Those towns that are the final zoning authority are essentially grandfathered in because it existed prior.
It was Glastonbury and
Glastonbury, West Hartford, and there were a couple others. But there's a specific statute, and we can get this for you that says you can't do that anymore.
What if we added a provision requiring the zoning commission to consult with the Board of Selectmen, again, not subject to its approval or oversight, but to consult with the Board of Selectmen about litigation? Would that overcome the privilege problem?
I doubt it. Again, because the charter provision, whatever language you put in the charter, not gonna preempt the process that's laid out in the statute.
Even if it's in the code instead of being in the
Doesn't
charter?
matter, code
if it's a
or
state
charter.
statute, it doesn't.
The statute preempts it. Because again, that big principle, matter of statewide concern, zoning is a matter of
But
statewide concern.
would that be preempted? I mean, would it be contrary to any provision in the statutes to say that the zoning commission needs to receive advice from the Board of Selectmen?
That's separate from the privilege issue though, right?
That is separate from the
They're not
privilege
really
issue.
related.
The privilege issue is that the zoning commission could not relay to the Board of Selectmen the advice that's being given by the lawyer representing the zoning commission. A provision that said, of course, I don't think it'd be wise to write a provision that said every zoning appeal has to, the Board of Selectmen may not be consulted, because it could be
That's true.
a two-lot subdivision. On the other hand, a very large project, the definition would have to be, it's a problem to write a definition of what a large project is. We have to look at whether you could write a provision that said, in effect, for big important projects that have major impact on the town, the zoning commission, prior to settling any land use appeal, must seek the advice and consultation with the Board of Selectmen.
If we look at it the other way, right, the privilege issue is that the advice of counsel, the communication with counsel can't include any person who's not necessary to the provision of advice. So the question is, are there cases, can we demonstrate that the Board of Selectmen has a necessary relationship to the Board of, or a relationship to the Board of, the zoning commission such that its participation in those discussions or its input in those discussions is necessary? I don't know how to do that.
What is the current set of checks and balances as far as planning, the zoning commission is concerned? Because if the Board of Selectmen cannot get involved in it, and that's our legislative body, what's the check to what the zoning commission can do?
The regulation,
Dinner.
the way it's set up is the zoning commission is the legislative body for purposes of zoning. And they operate under their regulations. And by law, their role is to apply their regulations to a given applicant, and the applicant really has a due process right to have that application heard based solely on the regulations. And there's a lot of gray area. The regulations say things like for special permits must be consistent with the character of the surrounding area. Courts hate those regulations because they're so subjective. If you try to interject another decision-making body into that process, the applicant's gonna and say, time out. I don't have to, I'm the applicant, I don't have to concern myself with what the legislative body thinks. I have to concern myself with what your regulations say, and whether my application meets those regulations. And you can't deny me my permit unless my application's not consistent with your regulations. And to say the legislative body can step in and say, well, we're concerned about the overall impact of this application. The legislative body can clearly go to the public hearing and say all of those things. And that's done, not routinely, but it is done where the message is sent to the commission through the public hearing process that, hey, if you allow this 600 lot subdivision to be built, there's gonna be significant impacts on the community, traffic and water quality, all the things you can imagine. But that has to be done, and again, that decision on that application has to be solely within the four corners of what's introduced into the record at the public hearing. So if you have the legislative body have the ability through the charter comment on an application outside of that public hearing process, that's a fatal flaw in the decision making. It just can't happen. Now, can the legislative body meet with the zoning commission and the land use bodies annually or quarterly to talk about big policy goals? Yes, absolutely. But those policy goals have to find their way into regulation before they can be applied to a given application. It would be fatal to a decision by the zoning commission if part of the record, if there were contacts with the commission outside of the record. And the zoning commission wouldn't do it because they're trained, told repeatedly, only what's in that record. You can't have a conversation with somebody in a grocery store if you're a commissioner. You're pushing your cart down the aisle and someone says, hey, I saw on TV what you were hearing. That's the worst thing that could happen to this town. The commissioner has to say, well, if you feel that way, please send us a letter or come to the public hearing. It's very important to do that because those procedural errors are what gets decisions overturned, not the substantive decision making. It's usually upheld by courts. But any ex parte conversations outside the public hearing process or consultation with any group, legislative body, town manager, or whatever, could be fatal to the decision.
So if I were to understand correctly, the check to that would be that the Board of Selectmen would to stay on top of everything that's being placed before zoning and then go to the public hearing and then make that.
Sure, if they so choose, absolutely. And it's a little easier here where the commissions are elected, where they're appointed. There is a claim when that happens that the appointing authority commenting on an application is exercising predetermination and bias on behalf of an improper influence over the commission, because the implicit threat is if you don't see things my way, you won't find yourself back on the commission next time around. And that's, sort of more true today than it's ever been, not at this level. So that's the caution. The caution is whatever you try to do to bring the Board of Selectmen into the land use process, unless it's a meeting to discuss policy objectives for the coming year or something, without any mention of any particular application, I think that's okay. It's perfectly reasonable for the Board of Selectmen to say, we're doing all these studies, we're looking at our economic future, we really need more industrial development in the town. Would you please consider more industrial zone land? There's nothing wrong with that, that's appropriate. The Board of Selectmen has to think about the future grand list growth, ability to meet the financial needs of the town. If all you have is one type of zone that doesn't produce grand list growth without any opportunity for high value development to come in anywhere, that would be a legitimate concern. I'm just playing out a scenario where it would be appropriate for the Board of Selectmen to say, based on what we're looking at, our goals and objectives, to be able to meet our budgets, we need more high value grand list growth.
Is that a charter question though, to put something like that in the charter?
Not necessarily, what you would put in the charter is just a requirement that the Board of Selectmen initiate discussions with the land use agencies, you know. I don't think you can compel the zoning commission to come and listen to them. But certainly,
But does that need to be in the charter, or
Yeah,
can they
does
add it
that
to the
need to be-
code?
Yeah.
Because
Does
could
that
they
need to
add
be
it to
in
the
the
code
charter?
that they have an annual meeting, or that they,
it's really what
that
your
they-
Economic Development Commission is for, it's exactly that.
Well,
Still all this and bring
in
it,
theory, but
yeah, in theory.
So what was E originally intended for, 502E with contracts?
502E is so that the town does not enter into long-term governmental contracts with the United States government or the state of Connecticut without Board of Selectmen approval.
so does that encompass grants?
Yeah.
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 It's ultimately a contract.
Right.
Doesn't say apply for it, just enter into.
Well,
the
because that came up in discussion too,
Yeah.
with both the
Yeah,
board and the town
and-
manager of what they can, they have to get approval, town manager has to get approval to apply for something.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes there's not a board of selectmen meeting to get that approval at.
Yeah, the idea is that, you know, there may be some grants that the Board of Selectmen doesn't want to apply for because it has long-term financial obligations. You know, the old COPS grant years ago, I dealt with this in another life where they fund your new positions in your police department for 3 years. And that was great, you know, hire more cops, get them on the street, you know, community policing, all this stuff. We're gonna give you money for 3 years. Well, cops don't work for 3 years, they work for 25 years.
Right.
And you're committing to the 3-year grant, you got another 22
Mhm.
years to pay those people. So that's the intent of this, is to avoid long-term commitments through grants that the Board of Selectmen isn't aware of.
So is this where we would address the process of how grants are applied for, or is that somewhere else?
Well,
There's a grant section
the
in the,
grant section's in the Board of Selectmen power.
right, so we can get to that, okay, but this would cover grants, just the overarching language, and then but what I'm hearing is anything specific regarding conversations with land use boards or collective bargaining agreements, that the Board of Selectmen, it's their responsibility to request those meetings,
Yeah.
either annually or prior to the negotiations from the town manager.
Yeah, on the labor side, I think it's pretty typical that the legislative body sets the goals and objectives for the upcoming labor negotiations. It doesn't participate or negotiate, but just says, you know, we'd love to end up with a financially neutral contract because we're really struggling this year with the grand list. And so if you give a little on this side, you gotta try to get a little on that side, just as a guiding principle. And then you send your negotiating agent into negotiations to try to achieve that. Now, if he or she comes back with a tentative agreement that doesn't do that, then it's up to the board to consider whether or not to approve it.
Okay.
Just to stick with this zoning problem for a minute longer. If I were a defendant in a lawsuit, say having to do with my property, and I thought my neighbor, who was not a party to the lawsuit, who was a separate legal entity, he might be able to contribute something to a global settlement. But it's necessary to keep these discussions confidential.
Mhm.
And it's necessary to find out what he can do to disclose something about the negotiations. I believe I could authorize my attorney to go speak to the neighbor, and what he finds out from him would at least be work product, if not privileged, because it's something that he needs to determine in order to render advice about a settlement. So if that is, if the zoning board, the zoning commission thinks, well, we're dealing with a developer's lawsuit, the town might have something to offer to this. We want to have a discussion with them, or we want our attorney to have a discussion with them. I guess that would have to that would have to start with the zoning commission. We can't mandate that as a procedure based on what you've told me. But maybe in our report, we could recommend that that's something they try to do.
I mean, the general principle, I think, is attorneys can always talk to attorneys. You know, in what you're discussing, could the attorney representing the commission, if it's not the same attorney representing the town, sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't, could they have a discussion, something the town could offer to make the, it gets tricky though, because again, it's outside the public hearing process. I just, you can, the process is when you settle a land use litigation, you gotta go to the court, and there has to be a court hearing before you can enter into any settlement. So I suppose at that court hearing, because you always have to remember on land use, you've gotta think about all the parties withstanding, all the abutters, and the idea is you can't leave them out of the process by coming up with a deal that you work out, behind closed doors.
Right, but this would be a matter of finding out what the zoning commission could offer in a settlement, right? It's not making a deal with the other side. It's really preparing the zoning commission's own case. And it seems to me that maybe, that there wouldn't be a basis for penetrating those communications. That should be covered by the privilege. It's part of the attorney's job in that case to find out what it's possible for his client to offer in a settlement.
Because wasn't one of the conversations that came up was because if the zoning board is being sued, the zoning board doesn't necessarily know what the Board of Selectmen, whether it's tax abatements or sewer permit relief or anything like that. They don't have the authority to make those decisions because there's budgetary implications to it. And so they don't know what bargaining chips that they've got, right?
That was Mark's point.
Right.
Exactly. And so it may be that the town manager can't get into those discussions with the zoning commission, but the attorney for the zoning commission could discuss with the Board of Selectmen or its representatives what they're able to do, and what they're able to contribute to a possible settlement.
But isn't that, then the town manager can just call the attorney and talk to them about it? I don't know what we're gonna write in here that's gonna
Yeah.
override
No, I don't
anything
think
that
we
you're,
can.
I don't think we can either.
No, I don't think it's.
That's a matter of kind of strategy or that a good idea for them to do, but it really doesn't have anything to do with what we're gonna add in here. You're not gonna mandate the commission's attorney to do X, Y, or Z, they're gonna tell you to pound sand, so.
I agree with that.
Is that the legal?
Yeah.
Okay.
Your law.
Most definitely.
Franklin will put
Get next to take a hike.
Yeah.
Oh, that runs in the appendix, found it. Capital.
Yeah.
Most land use appeals come from denials of permits.
Right.
Yeah.
Not approvals.
The applicant
Yeah.
suing the town because the permit's been denied. Sometimes you get a waiver.
Okay, so for this section, for 502 and 503, we've decided, just to finalize things, we're gonna combine 502C and 503A with the language that we read. We're not doing anything to E. We are making 503B now 503A. 503C becomes B, and we made changes to that at the last meeting. And then we're done with the town manager section.
Congratulations, Madam Chair.
For the
Did
moment.
we, did we
Yeah, there's-
discuss D? I thought, I had some notes of 502D, sorry.
We wanted to strike and shall make periodic
Yeah.
reports to the Board of Selectmen on the condition and affairs of the town.
But I had to, I don't know why, and maybe I was getting a late night last night.
I mean, you could,
The second paragraph, D, like, what does this mean? Is what I put here on
D
mine.
really belongs in 502A.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
The town shall see, town manager shall see that all laws.
Right, that's what we came up, because
That's
the laws were mentioned twice, and we didn't know if we needed to have D
Can we
in
just get
four.
rid of D?
D would be
It's redundant,
first sentence of 502A.
so we can get rid of D,
Yeah.
I think so.
No.
The whole,
the whole thing.
That's what I thought, I was like,
Thank you for bringing that up.
because I'm like,
Good catch.
I was like, D, you're training me good.
I know.
So
I'm
Franklin
so
and I
proud
will
of you.
redraft 502.
Yeah.
And we'll give you a clean draft with the red line, no red line gets awfully messy when you have these changes. We could just, we'll give you the red line.
And then we'll get back to
Yes.
this one at some point.
Yeah.
So there's,
501.
We had done 501.
I don't think we did 501?
Well, we
I thought we were gonna do that, from what I saw, we
were
were
gonna do
after.
the name.
Oh, we had to come back to it once we finished the
When
rest
we-
of everything.
Once we finished selectmen, we were coming back to 501,
Okay.
because it was the conversation around
Titles.
titles and roles.
Yes, and the defined terms.
And the defined terms that we now have a glossary for. Because we didn't wanna talk about the town manager role or name until we spoke about the board of selectmen section. That's how
Yes, so it's not, so the town manager chapter's not completely done.
done, but we have to go back to 501 after we discuss
Oh, 2 and 03.
chapter, section 400,
Okay.
right?
Woohoo!
I have to go to the Intergovernmental Commission.
No. As
We are
soon
more
as you
important
leave, we
than-
will have
Inland's
100
wetland, come on.
questions that you're going to have to wait.
No, well, they have an intervenor application that they need to know. Guiding them through that. I don't know if it's for Dean, maybe.
Oh, I'm sure we will be.
Permission to clone, town attorney Bob, Crucenso.
We'll put that in the chart.
Yeah.
So,
Where are you going next?
Four, that's chapter 4.
chapter 4,
For the.
Board of Selectmen?
Board of Selectmen. So,
we don't need any advice from
What a selectman and first selectman or first select woman.
so, let's forget the names for a moment,
Yes.
right? Because we haven't really settled on the names, right?
One of the thoughts that I had, Chair, was actually renaming this section since it's talking about whatever we decide, but it's talking about the legislative body. So one of the cleanups could be, that I was going to mention at some point, but since we're just highlighting it, could be that this section could be the legislative body, or that could be the title of it. And then when it talks about the town manager or whatever is decided, that could be the executive branch.
Is that too general, because isn't zoning a legislative body as well? No?
In this context,
No, okay,
The legislative body is
Is
Board of Selectmen.
Board of Selectmen, okay.
just a thought, I
Yeah.
wanted to,
So, I think the first thing to tackle is how long the terms are for,
Yeah.
okay? Because we've heard from a lot of people that Board of Selectmen included, that they would like the terms extended to 4 years. And do we all agree or disagree, or wanna have a conversation around that? Anybody opposed to the change to 4 years?
I would second what we heard from the members of the Board of Selectmen. As a member of the Board of Finance, I can tell you that it takes a while to get up
Yeah.
to speed in town matters. And I think a 4-year term makes a good deal of sense.
So I know in the last charter, you guys addressed changing the terms to staggered term, like there was language for that intermediary step,
Mhm.
right?
Would that be covered under section 302 though?
Yes, the way you stagger is you have a class 1, or class A members and class B members for that initial term. So the class A members serve for a 2-year term, class B members serve for a 4-year term for the initial term. And then that automatically staggers because the 2-year people are up in 2 years. And they become 4-year people and then I can't stagger if you have 2 years.
How do you determine
You-
two?
Well,
Who's the short straw?
Yeah, that's the question.
It's a short straw.
Started in 2027. and the parties nominate to Class A and Class B.
That's interesting. The parties essentially answer that
Yeah,
question.
there's.
Okay.
So how is
Let them
that,
do it. Yeah, that's what
Well- what happens in that case if you've got the parties who nominate and decide
Yeah, the problem.
A and B, and then there's an
Yeah,
unaffiliated
but that's-
candidate that gets on the ballot?
Well, they would have to run for a Class A or a Class B
They have to
office.
choose.
They'd have to
Yeah,
choose.
They'd have to choose, okay.
The question is, since no more than 4 representatives of a single party can be on the board, is that?
That complicates things.
Yeah, that's.
Well, it does and it doesn't. I mean, if you have 3 Class A offices, and 3 Class B offices, then 2 of the 3, no more than 2 of the 3 can be from a single political party. That first time around, I think it gets tricky, but then it fixes itself, I think.
Yeah,
Because then everybody's running for a 4-year office.
right. Yeah, that's probably right.
You know, it's probably, but the thing to keep in mind is when you adopt a new charter, all previous offices go out of existence. And the only offices that exist are the ones you create in the new charter, which is what happened last time. So no one is entitled to their office because it's a new charter and they have to run. Just like today, no one's entitled to a second term, you have to run for it, it's like 1 year, you just have to get to stagger, you don't have to stagger, but if you wanna stagger, you've gotta have those 2 classes.
Could you just bear with me here? Could you nominate as you do today and say some, I don't know what the magic number would be, but the lowest 2 vote getters or lowest 3, that bumps them down into the 2-year term?
Don't think so. I think you have to nominate for.
We have to nominate that way?
2-year term.
Okay.
Because you would never, you have to think about that, but I think you have to run for an office. And that initial election under the new charter has to be a defined office, a 2-year office and a 4-year office. And the language would say after the initial election, all offices are 4-year offices, but it was built in staggering because the 2-year people would come up in 2 years.
Right.
They'd last 2 years longer than the 4-year people. Just like I think the Board of
So how do you
Finance does it
run-
that way.
So you
First
structure
selectman's
it,
position though, so is the first selectman's position the first go around a 4-year term or a 2-year term?
Yeah, 4-year term,
Yeah.
But they're one of the 6 members.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you have to have them bump a 4-year.
So each party would have to nominate 1 4-year person to run for first.
Yes, and that
You could-
person could bump out a 4-year Class B person if they're a higher vote getter.
you could eliminate that problem if the Board of Selectmen appoints the first.
Which has been discussed too.
So one of the things that I had written was that you would do that on a staggered basis where it would be 3 for the 3, and then next time around it'd be 3. Every municipal election, you got 3 selectmen up, and it would be for a 4-year term. That's what you're talking about regarding a staggered.
Instead of doing a staggered, then everything goes back to everybody the following one.
But you have to start
Just
that
initially,
somewhere.
2 years
Right,
and 4
initial-
years.
The only way you get to that is if your initial election had a class of either 2 years, well, that's
Right.
2 or 4. Because then you couldn't get to the point where you're staggering because everybody would come up with 4 years.
If the first selectman is separately elected, we could make as now, and that's a 4-year term. And then there'll be 2 other selectmen in Class A for 4 years and 3 for Class B.
Mm-hmm.
And the question, we'd have to work out the party affiliation issue, but I think that's workable.
It's workable, yeah. You
Because
could-
if you did where the first selectman was chosen by the Board of Selectmen after, wonder if the choice is not a four-year candidate, you'd have to specify, like, if they're choosing
Right.
a person and that person is a two-year candidate, you'd have to specify that they'd have to be a four-year candidate that they're choosing from,
You'd have to
Correct.
choose.
and
from
that's
four.
only two people.
No, what you do is
Well, no,
every
3
2
people.
years, the board decides who's gonna be the first.
An organizational meeting.
At the organizational meeting,
Yeah,
they decide who's gonna be, and if they like what was going on, they'll reappoint that person. If they don't, then they'll say, you're on the board, but you're not the first.
yeah, that would work.
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, in other words, two separate issues. One is how to select the first selectman. The staggering, I think, will take care of itself either way.
How would the citizens of Simsbury feel
Yeah.
if they couldn't elect their first selectman?
Well, that's a major cultural change. for
That's a big
sure.
cultural change.
Yeah, it's, I mean,
I
that's
have to
part of
apologize
how we
for
do
that.
this, right?
Yeah.
I
Well,
mean,
there's other towns that's how they do it.
Steve wants to make a comment.
So the,
I'll be back in 2
Call the mayor.
weeks, especially if there's pizza.
Take
You
cookies for the
take
road.
Pizza.
I'll bring it.
Did
Take
you all
some
have,
pizza.
did you all have pizza when I was online?
No.
I'm gonna tell you.
Yes, and we had ice cream sundaes when you left.
Yeah, but they didn't have the bottle of scotch that you had.
Wait, I'm going
Take one
online.
of the boxes, please.
No. I'm not in danger of
You're
missing
you're gonna see a bunch of my neighbors at that meeting, so say hello.
it. Yeah, no, it's entertainers.
I know what this is for.
Yeah, it's for the, I don't know.
Thanks,
Right.
Bob.
Okay.
Thank
See
you.
you in 2 weeks.
See you, Bob.
See ya.
Have fun.
Thank you.
Steve,
So the one nuance to what you guys were referencing about the first it's more of a town council / mayoral type form of government. And the tradition throughout the United States, it's usually not written into the charter, is that the highest vote getter is usually who they put up for mayor. By making it every 2 years, it doesn't give what we're looking for, which is a consistent, heavy, steady, not heavy, steady hand. So I just wanna point that out, that if the first selectman is reviewed every 24 months, it just makes it harder for the town council where, that unwritten policy is enacted. But also, it just, it takes away, but it's only one time around, so you could have a 2-year select person the first time.
Well, you also, if you look at, planning, zoning, Board of Finance,
Board of Ed.
Board of Ed, they all pick who the chair is.
Right. I'm not against it,
Yeah.
don't misconstrue what I'm saying, I'm just presenting this so that you guys are
It is
aware of it.
It is a cultural change, though, in
It's
the
a
charter.
question
It's a
for
big,
the
it's a big
citizens.
change.
That's a big change.
Yeah.
Um,
And no citizen has come here except for Kevin, of course, and suggested that, saying that we believe that should be the case.
Well,
what we
but
can
Mark said, when I brought that up with Mark, he said that he would not be opposed to that.
But he's not a
He's
citizen.
not a citizen.
Well, I
He's
know
an employee.
town manager, but,
He doesn't even live here, so.
He's not a voter.
but he does, we've listened to some of the things that he had to say, and, we're weighed, whether we want to accept or reject some of the things that he said.
But the
We
question-
do have another public hearing, so if we feel strongly that this should be suggested, we could do
Well,
that in
my
the-
question would be, do people realize that that's even a possibility?
Yes, so that would be the opportunity to put something like that before them. But it was not suggested to us, and it was, I feel like if we were to say this, that this is a possibility, we would have opinions.
Yeah.
Which
Yes.
if we do something like this, it has to be something that the public gets to consider.
Hold on. Under our charge, under 2B, it says, consider amending a separate election of the chief elected official to the alternative of appointing the chief elected official by vote of the Board of Selectmen / town council.
We
So
discussed
it was in there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay? And I had,
Good.
I had talked about the merits of that. But again, it's just a question of, do we wanna do that in conjunction with the 4-year term?
Well, let me say also, we haven't yet discussed what exactly the role of the first select person is going to be. You know, because when Mark said he would accept this process, but he also expressed the view that the only role of the first select person is to set the agenda for Board of Selectmen meetings. If we end up saying that's all that distinguishes the first selectman, then I don't have a problem
Right.
having that person
That get-
appointed.
that's exactly
But I do
my
have a
point.
problem with limiting the role that way.
Right, that gets exactly to one of my concerns is, and Wendy has said this, but again, I have to separate that it's not just Wendy. It's the next person coming in. And is that person the chief elected officer, or is that person the chief executive officer? And does the town consider the first to be the chief executive officer and have the more say in the implementation of what the Board of Selectmen, the direction the Board of Selectmen provides? So those are the things we
Because
gotta
that
talk
changes
about.
the role of the town manager
Yes.
to be more of an administrative position.
Exactly.
When you say chief executive officer, what is the definition of that? Ish.
Well, what I had suggested, but again, you know, if there's more roles here, is that the first selectman or first select woman shall oversee the affairs of the town. Now, I tried to be minimal here in what I was doing. And again, it was only just my thoughts, it wasn't meant to
No, I
be
understand.
whatever. And then I changed the town manager role from chief executive officer to chief administrative officer, which is already there. Not changing the title, I'm not into like changing the titles and all of that. I don't think that's necessary. And it was giving the first selectman more direct responsibility for the town manager. Because from what we have heard is that doesn't appear to be what the current first selectman feels, selectwoman feels they have. So it's like, okay, well, we'll change it. We'll do a couple of words here. We'll change it, make it a little clearer, okay, that they do have more direct oversight of the town manager without blowing the whole charter up. So that's what I was trying to do when I sent you guys this.
So the conversation about mayor, town council, select person, first selectman, I don't think you can go to mayor, town council if we're appointing someone, because I don't think philosophically someone can buy into a mayor being an appointed position.
Agreed.
Just
West Hartford.
culturally, well, I don't wanna be West Hartford. So, I can't get across town in a half an hour in West Hartford, so.
It's true.
Yeah, we'll kill traffic if we change.
Traffic will happen, but I don't think, and I don't wanna be presumptive, but I don't think people, residents, taxpayers I can't wrap my head around a mayor being an appointed position.
Yeah.
I can wrap my head around first selectman being an appointed position, but I can't wrap my head around a mayor just because of the way mayor is typically a political position,
And you become a city, in my opinion.
and you become
Let's-
larger.
Let's decide if we're really having a mayor, you know.
Right.
I mean, I think we need, first off, to focus on what is the role of the first selectman going to be vis-à-vis the town manager. I don't know if we can do it with, I mean, I would endorse what you proposed, but we've got this is chapter 96 and this is chapter 99, so I think it was in chapter 99.
What are you looking for?
There's the statute that in the home rule statute that deals with the
First selectman?
no, that gives us the option of appointing a town manager. And it's not,
It's number 191.
It could be in the first paragraph of that.
no,
Are you looking at 191A? 191A, inclusion.
Is it 99 or 96?
I think it's definitely in 99. There is a provision that allows us to appoint
Is that 191C? Is that the one you're looking at?
193,
2.
municipality shall have a chief executive officer,
Maybe
one of the following,
Jeff.
7-193. This one here.
Where it says the
Selection of a
municipality may
chief
have
executive
legislative-
officer.
No, okay, it's section 7-193 subsection 2.
Which is on the left-hand side.
Where it says
So
for the
it may
municipality.
have a chief executive officer who may be one of the following, and one of the options is, where is it?
Well, it says C, a mayor elected by the,
Yeah, there's a
Electors.
warden, okay, a town, city, or borough manager appoint. This is different from the language, I think.
What did the language say?
Yeah, what I remember is a statute providing that the chief executive officer may be a town manager who shall be the chief administrator. And none of that is in here. So
Well, she says the municipality shall have a chief executive officer who may be one of the following.
yeah,
The first selectman, a chief administrative officer appointed by the board of selectmen, a mayor elected by the electors of the
yeah,
municipality.
so I mean, he
warden-
would be the town manager, but I think there's a different version of this statute, and I don't know which is more up to date. Let's not get hung up on that. I was trying to make a point, and I'll go back. I think that the terms chief executive officer and chief administrative officers are more or less interchangeable in this statute, so that calling the first selectman one and not the other doesn't answer our questions.
But what about chief elected officer?
Well, chief elective
Yeah, that's-
officer, that's great, but I don't know
No, I'm
what
just saying there-
distinguishes chief elective.
Yeah, I know, what defines these three
Yeah,
things?
so-
But if we have chapter 5, if we take out chief executive,
Yeah.
you know, the duties remain the same.
Yeah, that's my point.
Yeah.
So what I think we need to focus on is what powers, specific powers we're giving to the first select person and the town manager. What I mentioned at the last meeting, what I have in mind is that, you know, the town manager should be responsible to the Board of Selectmen as a whole, but that the first select person should have principal responsibility for coordinating and managing that relationship. And that would mean, for example, we've added a provision that says the town manager has to share or provide resources, I would add information, staffing to all the elected boards, including the Board of Selectmen, so that they can do their jobs. I would say that in providing information to the Board of Selectmen, both the town manager and the first select person should be responsible for making sure that all 6 members of the board receive that information. To the extent that the Board of Selectmen has to provide instructions or information to the town manager, outside of its meetings, I would say that that is the job of the first selectman.
Can I just interject, and I'm sorry for being late, but it just feels like we've gone down the rabbit hole a little bit here.
Yeah.
Chris's original question was staggered terms, 4-year terms, and we somehow got into information provided by the town manager.
Yeah.
So can we, with
Yes, please.
please, with your permission, can we close out some of those original
Sure.
questions?
Yeah.
And then, these are all good conversations, I just wanna make, it doesn't feel like we're answering the questions, we keep kind of going down this rabbit hole each meeting, and we're not closing out
I think you're right.
central questions.
Finding new questions.
We're not moving forward in some of this stuff, right? Cause some of the stuff we're not gonna be able to get to unless we answer just put to bed some of this stuff.
So term. 4 years,
This is for the Board of Selectmen.
staggered.
Yes, yes.
Well, for 2027 would be the first election where there's staggered terms to transition into this 4-year term. And what Bob discussed, we need to clarify. We're gonna have, we have 3 and 3, right? We're gonna have 2 4-year, one from each party, right? That can run for first. And then do we have an additional 4-year for each party and 1 2-year for each party? Because you can't make the first a 2-year.
Well,
But you,
why
This
don't
is
we
true.
resolve, I mean, I think we're in agreement that we should have 4-year terms and we should stagger it starting in 27, and that 3 members will be elected to a 4-year term, 3 to a 2-year term. And the question of how we deal with the party affiliation and, is complicated by how we elect the first select person. So I suggest we put off the decision about how we select the first select person until we discuss what the role of the first select person is, and then we come back to that. In other words, if it's a very limited role, then I think it's easy. We'll do 3 and 3, and the board will select their chair.
But I'm not so sure it's easy, let me just gently push back a little bit, again, being this town, I would struggle, and don't read into my comments, but I'm assuming there will be a significant portion of this town that it will struggle with
Okay.
not electing the town manager as a very powerful, and then not electing the first select person as well. That,
In every election.
that's a big lift to me.
It also feels like a big, I'm letting go of all power and trusting
Right.
2 people
That's
that
absolutely
I may not agree with, and I have
Absolutely.
nothing I can say about it.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
And putting everybody in for longer.
yeah.
Yeah. Let's just say you get a bad first select person. I'm just saying, we're talking position, not people.
Sure.
They've got a lot of power and can manipulate a town manager, and things can go downhill quickly in 4
Well,
years.
okay,
I
but
think
can I just interject one thing? 4-year term, staggered, but are we also talking about every municipal election, you're going to elect 3 Board of Selectmen?
I think so.
Okay, so it's not like, once the 2-year is done, and those
No,
people, then every 4 years, you're gonna elect a first
Yeah.
and 5 people,
No, 3, just 3.
or 3,
Yeah.
okay,
After that
All right.
first 2-year
right,
period.
right, you're gonna
Let's
do
ignore the
that,
first,
okay.
let's ignore the
Right.
transition period for a second. I think that's
Well,
good.
it's an
so you're not getting a
important
whole new board.
No, that's
Yeah,
right.
that's the key, you
Yeah,
should
you're
get
not
a
gonna
whole
get a
new
whole new
board, yeah.
board.
So it's
It gets
staggered
back
like the
to, yeah,
Board
a
of
whole new
Finance.
board.
Yeah, but
What do
Board
you
of
do?
Finance has to select
Every 2
their own
years.
chair, and because otherwise, you might have one that's not
Right.
part of the voting process.
I
That's
just
confused.
think that, taking that away from the people where they don't get to choose their first selectman is going to have some pushback.
Especially since a lot of public audience we've heard has been about transparency in government.
Yeah.
Yep.
And if we
And-
were going to make changes, I'd rather do it incrementally. We do the staggered term and then
Get them used to that,
get
get all
them
of us
used to it and then, have that be a part of the discussion for the next revision commission.
Well, but then you'll be locked into this first selectman election cycle where there's no say about first selectman until the next election cycle. You'll have 2-year period where no one gets a say, if we're still electing the first selectman.
But we're gonna make the first selectman a four-year
yeah.
position
No matter what.
from the get-go in 2027, so it will always be every 4 years, you're electing a first.
Yeah, but every 2 years when you have an election, every other 2 years, you won't have a say about the first selectman potentially.
Correct.
Correct,
Yeah,
right,
Yes,
but the goal is to keep the first as 4-year term.
Yeah.
Right?
Mhm.
That's what we're saying.
yeah.
Also, I just wanna mention that you can just, the commission probably, it'd be better suited to just discuss the general ideas and then come to a conclusion and then leave town attorney DiCrescenzo and myself to draft the language specifically, choosing the correct
So we're not
spot,
illegal.
and then final review.
Yeah.
Of course, you can add whatever language, or if you have a great discussion and want to include specific language in the charter right then and there, I can make the comment. But I believe any thoughts you have, town attorney DiCrescenzo can put into the charter correctly and probably word it the way that you would be in agreement with. So maybe just discussing the general ideas and coming to a consensus on that would be the most prudent.
Okay, thank you. So we're all in agreement with 2027, that we're gonna do 4-year term for the first, staggered terms, or 2-year terms or 4-year terms, we have to figure out party affiliation.
Class A, Class B.
And then,
So that
Every-
the
every-
first selectman and 2 other members of the board
Board.
will be elected to a 4-year term
right,
in 2027.
right,
3 other members
Members are
will be
2
elected
years.
to a 2-year term.
Here's my other question, and I think if we do it this way, and I think this is a sound route to go, I think the loser of the first selectman race bumping down into this, I don't know if you can do that anymore.
not that way.
Yeah. I'm not saying it's a good or bad thing, I just think that
Not for
No.
that first,
option
for
is
that
not,
first election.
or just in general,
Oh, yeah.
just in general.
But is that a
Because you've
missed
Yeah, I
That's
have
a
a
missed
hard time with
opportunity for
not
us.
doing that though.
I'm
No.
totally open, I'm not sure how do you, cause in that year, the first selectman would be running. You'd be putting 3 people up, theoretically, both sides are putting 3 people up, right? Then the loser of the first selectman race would, I guess essentially just bump somebody out from there.
Right.
Maybe it still
Yeah.
happens the same way it does
It's
now, I
just
guess, or,
Yes, yeah.
4-year term.
It would just be a term
Yeah.
issue, that's it.
I guess,
Yeah.
I guess.
We have to specify that though.
Yeah,
I'm not so sure that, well,
but no.
Because
I have an
there's-
issue with a loser
Well,
that's
hold
maybe
on,
doesn't
hold
get as
on.
many
The-
votes as
the-
somebody.
Yeah, but they wouldn't
Sure.
automatically get it, they
They
still
would still
would
have to
have to have
the votes.
enough votes
Mhm.
to overcome the other 2 people
That's true.
on, that's how it is now.
Yeah.
But it's,
You know, they have to have,
but I
they
think,
have to have enough votes to get onto the
Yeah.
board.
but I think we have to be more specific in the charter related to that, because it's being customary and it's not in writing really very clearly on how that happens.
And
Am I correct in that, Selectman?
And why do we really
No, I'm
have
not
to keep
correct.
doing it? Well, it's a consolation prize, let's be honest, like,
We had
Do
that
we really
feedback
have
of
to
running
do
for
that? I
first selectman
mean-
versus board,
Yeah,
and
it's,
entering both,
Well, you have to consider, I mean, somebody who's running has said, I wanna serve the town.
Yes,
I get it.
and they got enough votes
And
from
they got enough
people.
votes to be on the board.
They didn't run
And-
for the board, they
What's that?
they ran for first,
Right.
they didn't
but-
run for the board.
No,
that's
the way
part-
it is now,
Well, yeah.
they get on the board if they get enough votes, and there's been situations where people have not gotten enough
Yep.
votes to get on the board, so they're number 7, they don't get on the board. And there's other situations where they have gotten more votes than any of the other 5, but not enough for first. So if you take away that person's ability to be on the board, you have just disenfranchised voters who said, I wanted that person on the board in the
Well-
current system.
They said they wanted that person for first,
mm-hmm.
they didn't say for the board.
No, then I think people, well, I can't say that they understand, but, you know, you have to look at, you've got somebody who's qualified, who said they wanted to run, and now you're saying, no, you can't be part of the process.
So does this,
Yeah, we want you to be the leader, but not part of the board, like
Yeah,
I
I
would
mean-
think if they
That's
thought
what
enough
happened.
for you to be first selectman.
You lose
but-
for governor, you're not given the consolation prize of being in legislature, I mean,
Or lieutenant
Yeah,
governor.
or
That's
lieutenant
it,
governor,
that's
right,
different,
exactly.
yeah.
That's a
No,
big, that's a different.
That's a big difference,
That's a
yeah.
big difference. That's a really.
But also, on the flip
principle's
side of
the
this,
same, though.
like if someone really wants to serve the community, okay? And maybe there's somebody running for first that is a strong candidate and you don't wanna run the risk of not getting on the board. Do you disincentivize someone for running for first and just running for the board and having the first have no one run against them because the person really wants to serve
That doesn't want us,
and doesn't wanna run the risk of not being on the board if they're the second highest vote getter.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I
But
guess,
if you really want to serve, you're going to find a way to serve somehow, right? In something.
you could be on this commission.
no, I mean, I see where
But you gotta
Jeff,
wait 7 years.
I mean, I do see where Jeff is coming
It's
from.
like the locust.
Because especially when we start getting unaffiliated voters, larger turnouts of people are informed of what the votes mean. We have age ranges, 18 to 80, 90. I have talked to my daughter, who's a younger voter. She was not aware of that. I mean, hears political discussion. I'm just telling you I have discussion just about the whole politics of things, and she was not aware. And she's grown up in this town that, oh, wait a second, that person didn't win, but they're still on the board. How did that happen? She assumed you got a person here and a person here, and that person wins, they're off. As a first. I know that's not the way our charter's written, but for people that aren't reading this and heavily involved in politics, you see the signs on your yard, and here's a first selectman, and here's the board. And it is two very different positions. Like, I don't want that person, or I definitely want that person to serve. Oh, they lost, how did they still get in? But I wanted those people to serve on the board, because they can commit to it.
Well, legally, so I'm gonna go back to, a long time ago, many months ago, we had this, I brought this up, is can someone run for two positions?
Yeah, that's the question. So can they be
Can you run for first and run for the board as a write-in? If you're not endorsed by the party because they wanna make sure they've got a seat,
Right.
like, can you run for both?
And how do we get unaffiliated into this whole mix too?
Well,
What if an unaffiliated get the second most votes? Are they in?
Then they're in. Then they're in.
I mean, I'm fairly agnostic on this issue, but it does seem to me, to Paul's point, is that, for example, if I'm part of a party organization, and I am, I would use my strongest candidate to run for first select person, and that person is gonna, likely be one of the top vote getters. Why wouldn't we want the most popular people to be serving on the board?
But if the most popular person is the person who ran for first, is the second highest vote getter,
Yeah.
and they don't get on the board because they didn't win first,
Right.
we're having not the most popular person
Yeah, no,
serve.
You're having
they're
this,
serving in
the
a different
seventh,
capacity,
is
yeah.
the seventh most popular person getting on board.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Instead of the second most popular person.
Right. Well, that's what I meant,
Right.
second most popular.
Right, and often you find that people run who have experience on various boards and commissions. And so they're coming in with experience to be on that board and contribute to the town.
Well, that's the other point, actually, is, the candidate that gets designated is likely to be the one who has the strongest case
I mean, I think
for serving.
right now, if you take that away, you're going to really take away the pool of candidates who are gonna run. And they're gonna say, well, I'm not gonna get on, I'll run, but I know I'm not gonna get on. They're not gonna wanna go through that kind of campaign without the what'd you call it, a consolation prize of being on the board. And they don't have to, by the way,
They don't have to choose.
to serve. If they, and I've seen that, where people said,
That happened in the past, where
yeah,
they
it's
said
happened in
no.
the past, said, no, I'm not gonna do it. So then
No,
the seventh person comes
I
up.
appreciate the discussion. The only reason I raise it is I think it's more complicated in the staggered situation because in that year with the first selectman running, they're gonna they potentially are gonna bump somebody out that would have won if they ran 2 years earlier. And maybe that's just how it works out, I don't know, but it's just, to me, it's not as cut and dried as I think
Yes,
we're,
we need to get to the staggered.
yeah.
We get back to
Because
the-
who
we
get-
get back to the point of the board picking the first. In
But
their
then-
organization.
Solves
Yeah, but
those
then you get back
logistics,
to-
but I think
That
it
solves
creates
it.
a
It creates-
public
Solves it,
concern
Yeah.
or feedback about
Right,
who's choosing.
The people should choose.
Yeah.
They should choose who they want to have as
But in
first.
theory, they've chosen the board.
Yeah, but they haven't chosen the first.
I don't think we wanna decide to have the, eliminate the election of the first selectman in order to save a space for the loser of that election. So, I mean, I don't think that should be our decisive issue.
Why don't we place that burden on Franklin?
His face. Oh, yeah.
To figure out the
Yeah.
logistics.
I am certain you
Well,
can do
because
that.
philosophically,
For
we
tonight,
all
that's-
agree to that, it's got to be staggered, it's got to be longer. Now the question is, what do we do with the second highest?
well,
With the
one of those
person who doesn't
solutions is
get
don't
first.
make it staggered.
Make
But then
everything
you'd
four,
have-
everyone's four.
Everyone's 4 years.
And then you'd have 4 years of chaos if everyone goes off and a whole new set of people show up, which is what happened just recently, right? And they had, from what they told us, they had quite a steep.
I don't think it was
Well, they had
chaos.
two-
I
No,
don't
I
think
mean,
he said
just-
They did have
chaos.
two people who stayed on.
They had 2 people returning,
Right, they had 2 people, Wendy
Wendy and Heather.
But they had put in so much effort to learn all of this, because so many of them were new, and we don't want to,
But that was kind of a rare case where you had that many, that you had 4 new people.
No, it's not a question, I understand it's rare and so forth, but if we are going to do the charter, the risk of that happening is there if we write it in without a staggered term. So if we did do a staggered term, there is this one hiccup, and then we'll have the attorney and Franklin figure out a set of options for us.
Do a lot of municipalities
Can I-
do staggered terms?
I'm not aware right now. I haven't done research on that. I can definitely do that on what municipalities have staggered terms for their legislative body.
I mean, that happens at the state level all the time too.
Yeah.
The staggered
Yeah.
term, especially in the Senate, they're all.
Right, there.
And then we can
Usually
see how
all
their charter, and what they say about the second vote getter, if
I
anything.
mean, Richfield
Yeah,
still
that's-
has a
that's
selectman form of government with a town manager.
Richfield keeps coming
I
up.
ca- you know what? I spend a lot of time.
Can we, I don't know,
I know Lockington really well in Richfield. It's really cold.
can I ask Mr. Beal to comment on this since he's gone through this regarding staggered terms, and Steve, if you wanna jump in too?
I am happy to provide comment. Some of what you've discussed here, I included in my your letter to you as well. And so if that's helpful, and you'll be in the first loser and the consolation prize winner. I agree with the other comments that were made that it's an opportunity for, especially in minority representation, for the highest vote getter from that party to serve. And I also don't know that you don't run the risk when we extend the terms to 4 years, which I agree with, of not having turnover. You may see an increase in number of members of the Board of Selectmen who are no longer able to serve their full term. I can get through these 2 years is a lot easier than trying to figure out, I can get through these 4. Life happens, the world happens, et cetera.
Tell me
So
about
I wouldn't necessarily drive everything that you're doing based on that upheaval, especially considering in that this most recent change was a result of that. There were several members who declined to run, which is why, there was probably more of a changeover. I think that Bert is actually absolutely right in his thought about the roles of the first selectman and how you want to conceive how they're appointed to this position. as I've interpreted, an effective form for this, appointing the chair, just like I think that Lisa does an excellent job as chairman of the Board of Finance, elected from that body and has direct relationships with staff and the conduct of the duties and providing information for the Board of Finance. Jeff, I'm sure that you do as well with Matt, and I know that Susan before you, and having that changeover has been really valuable, and I think the Board of Education is something to look up to, and as far as bipartisan governance as well, with having that alternating change and the best interest of what works for the schools. So I encourage you to consider that and what that might look like for the organization and functioning of the board. I think that it is absolutely important for the people to have a voice, and their voice is electing the duly constituted representatives. Just like your discussion earlier about zoning and land use and representation for the town, the people's representatives in those matters, whether it's litigation or on the just adjudication of a matter before the zoning commission, is those duly elected individuals. The Board of Selectmen's role in all those circumstances is making sure that there is a budget available to them to perform that function. Outside of that, the actual ruling on those cases is entirely up to those duly constituted representatives. So in the functioning of the Board of Selectmen, which has the fiduciary responsibility for the budget and the governance of the town and the legislative authority through state law, it is the entire board that has the responsibility for the management and hiring and firing of the town manager, and the creation of the laws. And it is the function of the chair, just like in Robert's rules, and I would look to Robert's rules yourselves and what the function of a chair and a board or commission and what their responsibilities are, is to allow for that discussion to happen, to set an agenda, and to make sure that it's a fair process. I don't have any concerns if the current first selectman were to be the chair of the Board of Selectmen. I think she could perform that function potentially if she was elected from among the body, but I do think that it gives the opportunity for all the members of the Board of Selectmen to give their voice into who's going to lead them in that conduct of those duties when they themselves were elected by the people to serve. So those are my thoughts. Thank you for the opportunity.
So if I can, I'm not totally aligned with Kevin, although we are somewhat aligned.
I like your pizza though, Steve.
I appreciate your patronage. The discussion you had earlier really resonated with me, that if the town manager is elected by the board and now the chair is elected by the board, there is no way for the townspeople to vocalize and fire people. I'm not saying that I'm all for firing people. I am saying that really resonated with me when you were saying the accountability back to the electors. And I think that's important. There was one question, as long as we're here, what happens if someone runs and doesn't get elected? They can run again in 2 years. So whether you're talking about the 7th position or a default position, it's irrelevant. My point is it's 24 months, they can get back in the game. I'm not saying that should be a guiding light. I just want to reiterate that. There's a lot of credibility in my mind hearing you say it, that the electors are speaking. When the default is actually the top vote getters, as you have also acknowledged. So although it can be viewed as a consolation prize, I agree with that perception, especially since Kevin got it on. But on a sincere note, the votes are there. And if you have Tweedledum from whichever party and they're unqualified and no one votes for them, they don't get the consolation prize. They get the votes that they didn't get and they're not on the board. So it is somewhat of a self-correcting thing. So hopefully that didn't just spin a circle.
Right, thanks, Steve.
Unless one round everyone's running on the position that we will vote a different first selectman to be selected out of our board, right?
Are you talking about a town council approach?
Yeah, well, if we're selecting within, the voice of the people is sort of eliminated, but also
So
the
just
three
from my
members could
own,
run.
and let me reiterate that one more time, from my own perspective, part of what I had for input into this was steady hands. And I think a 4-year term of a first selectman irrelevant of party or affiliation in any manner is part of that steady hand. The reverse could also be said, say the first selectman's new and they're not doing such a hot job. You can clean them out in 24 months. There's merit to both sides. You guys have to figure out which one's the correct path. Glad I could not contribute.
I'm not even sure what.
We have A, B, and C options,
We
I guess,
really
out
do.
there. and
Yeah, I think we gotta think
Well,
about that.
the thing
but-
is, we have to trust the people, right? If we say it's 4 years, or if the ballot says it's 4 years, for first selectman, people have to make that decision and send whoever it is, you know.
We do it for the President of the United States.
Right, and we have to.
Right or wrong?
We have to, if the election's fair and square, we all have to hold our peace on that for 4 years, and that's not something that, the town of Simsbury can make that decision. And so if it is easier and better to have a 4-year term, because that's what we're hearing. You know, if you elect a bad select person, that's on us. We should have been we should have been engaged in our democracy, and so, you know, I think the electorate can make that decision.
I don't think, and I agree with you, because I don't think we can take the ability away from
No.
our voters to choose somebody
Mhm.
in our government
As the first.
as the
As the
first,
first, yeah.
because they don't have a choice in town manager.
That's right.
And it's too much power given to, in my opinion, without the residents having a say-so.
Yeah, but that decision has to come from the people. And so.
But the assumption is also that the public perception will be that the first select person will be in charge of the town manager or associate in some way, even though I think by the rules that we see, it's technically the board that
Right.
decides it, but I don't think the public perception matches, you know, maybe what the charter says about who decides on.
That's right. If
Let it
you're
go to
going
the
to be
town manager.
first, you're going to be first, there's an assumption that you're doing something more than everyone else. And so, and also they get a stipend, and so their responsibilities and so forth. So we just have to clean that up.
So when you change to a 4-year term, do you have to in subsequent elections go to staggered terms, or can you just go to now 4-year elections?
I think
Those are two
we
different
could do
issues.
4-year
different-
and keep the same model we have right now, and it would
And-
probably be successful. I think that like they say, you have people trying to sign on for 4 years who may not, do we have to do special elections if someone steps down as a?
Yeah.
Which you could do every 24 months, but not, I don't know.
I'm not necessarily
No,
worried
it's-
about that,
Yeah.
the special elections will take care of all that. I guess if we just went to 4-year terms, I'm not sure it necessarily solves the issue that that was raised with
continuity.
us.
You'll
Yeah.
still have another election cycle where there's no,
Or we could lose
Potentially,
everybody.
yeah, potentially a big brain drain or something, you know what I mean? Like
Right.
staggered, as Steve's saying, I like the steady hand
Yeah,
character,
a
yeah.
staggered 4-year and
it's similar for Board of Finance or Board of Ed, where you
Right.
wouldn't wanna just go 4
Right,
years of
exactly.
And the
not a
transition
choice and then
year
another 4.
is just the awkward years.
Yeah,
2027
it
is
seems
just
like
the
a
awkward time.
significant
Yeah.
time.
Okay. So are we all in agreement on that?
So
Do we
that
need
means
to
we've
vote?
reached agreement on 4-year terms, staggered.
And you vote
We
for the-
haven't yet decided, I think, on whether we're gonna elect the first select person, right? And whether we-
I'm
I
for
think,
I think
I-
I think we need to go to a
Yeah.
public election.
yeah, I
Okay.
think we should
public
keep it.
election.
I mean, an election.
Oh.
Not an election by the board, but
Separate
like an
election of the
election.
first
selection.
Not a selection, an election.
Sorry.
Sorry.
So that's the third point. The last issue was what happens to the loser in the first select person election? Do they get the consolation prize?
And I'm sorry, that's
Or
a
a
terrible
set
term.
of-
I never said that. I didn't mean that at all, I mean it that way. It's a-
You should say, do they get the ability to serve?
Yes.
Or do they get the ability to choose to serve? Because there have been ones where they say, no, I don't want to. So I think that,
And again, they
Yeah.
have, that person has to get enough votes
That's right, that's the key.
to overcome the other two people
Right.
in that race.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the key.
Yeah.
And so
Right.
if you get enough, I am completely comfortable with that person serving because
Okay,
the
wait.
people have chosen.
But they have to be no more of a certain party.
How many members are on the Board of Finance?
Six, every two, and two every 2 years.
No, I was just thinking out loud, does it make it easier if there's an odd number? It makes it more complicated, I think, with
Makes
the
it more
math, because
complicated.
it's
Could
like doing
we-
calculus.
Franklin is gonna work all that out.
Yeah.
And when we say Class A and Class B, we would have, I guess it only matters for the first step of the stagger,
only
but
the
we have a
first.
full slate of only Class A candidates, only Class B
Right, but
candidates, so
that's-
maybe
That's for the
6 and
first-
6.
That's just for the first,
Yeah.
first time.
Oh, and that's another, I think, recommendation is how many, the membership of the legislative body. I think that's something you can cross off too now, if you wanna keep it at 6 or you wanna make it odd. I heard the commission has received communications regarding that. I don't wanna throw a wrench in the system,
Yes, you do.
but that's one of the recommendations to change the
Well,
membership of the legislature.
I only bring that up because I think it gives an opportunity for unaffiliated representation on the board, but you can't force that if no one's gonna run.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think that the whole unaffiliated conversation personally is, we just need to be more transparent about the process
Mhm.
for unaffiliated voters to get on the ballot, no matter what the board or commission is.
You could still bump someone
Because you
right
can
now.
still bump somebody, it's just the process is ambiguous
Right.
or cumbersome, is probably a better word. So I think we need to be more transparent about the process to encourage unaffiliated voters to participate in government. Because they're the largest party, if there's a part, they're the largest group in Simsbury. And we wanna make sure that they're heard, if they wanna be heard, right?
But is that our, it's
It's not in the
part of-
charter,
yeah, it's
so
not
I
in
don't
our-
think
the
we have to
purview
address it in the
what we-
charter, but
yeah.
I
I
did
mean-
see it in one charter that I looked at, there was one, and I can't remember which one, it did say, it did exactly what Chris said. It encouraged, simplified the process or made it clearer what the process was on how to do that. I'd look again for it, but I looked at so many charters, I should have printed that section off.
But honestly, I think that could just be a charge from the Board of Selectmen to the town clerk
Yeah.
prior to election cycles of what the process is for
That could
unaffiliated
be.
voters to get on the ballot.
Just
In
do
our
an info
report
session.
As a report, as a
receive feedback,
recommendation,
and here's the,
we can make a
process clarified.
recommendation that that's something that they consider each election cycle.
They get to figure out.
Well, the town clerk can figure it out, that's her job or his
Someone else can
job,
figure it out.
but
Cause if the process changes and we've put the old process
we don't wanna
in
put the old
here,
process
and then
in
you've
here,
got-
yeah, because if the
too,
state
so.
changes a rule,
Yeah.
That's true.
Right, that,
Madam
is
Chair, I have
that
a
something
question.
that's governed by statute, the
Mhm.
process, okay,
yes.
so then,
And we don't wanna reference the wrong statute or the statute changes or,
Okay, we done
Madam
with these?
Chair,
yeah, so
should we have a vote that that's what we recommend?
We can vote at the end out of everything, this,
This is just,
yeah, cause I'm taking notes on everything and then I think it could be a clean one meeting, maybe doing all the voting.
for each of the
So you have
chapters.
all this time until that last meeting to review, make any tweaks, so I have the notes.
So
Well done, Franklin.
I'm gonna make a recommendation because of the time. And we've got a couple other things to get through. I'd like to pick a couple of sections that we're going to focus on next time, not the whole chapter. Because we are not successful. So I think that we need to talk about, I'd like to focus on 402 and 403, which is the powers and the duties and the procedure piece of it. Because that seems to be
A chunk.
a big chunk of our conversation, unless anybody disagrees.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yeah.
I really liked in section 5 for the town manager, it was broken down a lot more. These are really big paragraphs that, I don't know, after about halfway through, my eyes start going buggy. I'm like, what are we talking about again? So I think one of the important things is to get it more, less is gonna be more, I think, for these two sections,
Yeah.
if we
Well,
can.
yeah, we can get that. So I mean, if we focus on really 401, 402, and 403 for our next meeting,
Mhm. Yeah,
because
That'll get a lot of
that's a lot.
Yeah.
The rest of this chapter is about very specific
Well,
instances.
411 is about the first select person.
Yeah, I was gonna also-
so I think that's what we would do next, after those three.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is everybody in agreement with that? So we're not trying to tackle an entire chapter?
Yes.
Yes.
Add 411.
As
That discussion.
possible,
Yeah,
As a
because you can
possible
add it,
addition.
and you don't necessarily have to
as a
discuss
possible addition.
it. It's just on the agenda to discuss.
It's aspiration.
It's an
Right.
outlandish aspiration.
Okay.
And this might have been answered, and I apologize. Is there a clear-cut definition of chief executive and chief elected and chief administrative, or is that up for interpretation?
See, she needs to be in my class.
Because I mean, go back to this often, and I think we all know eventually what it, but that's very confusing for whoever reads it. Oh, I think chief executive is X, Y, and Z. Is there a, in the same, the public service?
Well,
Is there a truly
Isn't there in
defined?
this-
Doesn't Paul have some recommendations on that?
Doesn't chapter
I did.
99 have that?
But I mean, I wonder, is there like a state or federally defined term for that?
There we go.
I
There's
don't,
not.
I
Okay.
don't, I would be
If you look on
shocked
one of the
if
state websites when I was in that, there is a list of the chief executive officers of
Sure, to
every
be
town.
visited.
If you look at Simsbury, it lists Wendy and Mark,
It
both
does.
are there.
Right.
So, I think that's designated
even
and you kind of have someone, but it could be more than one. That's an anecdote and just informal listing of context.
But versus chief elected, I've not seen the word chief elected officer very much.
Yeah.
That's where I'm a little muddy on that, what people are defining that one as.
Well, maybe that
Well-
comes up in conversation when we're talking about the role of first selectman. though,
Right, and
because-
that could go back to some of the things that I put in my
Okay.
memo.
Yeah,
Well,
that's-
basically,
Just
the
look at that again.
The chief executive officer is the hirer and firer of the town employees. The chief elected official is leading the legislative body and representing it. So basically, in just a layman's term, that is the distinction, that the CEO is signing the contracts, people are reporting to department heads and division heads who ultimately report to the CEO. And the chief elected official is the,
But in the charter, you can change what that is and the
Yeah.
working relationship between, quote, the chief executive officer and the chief administrative officer.
I think this brings back the point that Commissioner Helfand found, that somewhere it says that the municipality must have a chief executive officer, and that chief executive officer can be the chief administrative officer. I remember that
And
statute.
or could be the chief elected officer, and that's.
So that distinction is not, I think, as we mentioned before, is not substantive, is not material. Between administrative and executive, what's important is who is the executive officer? That needs to be,
And I think to have the true definition, because
It's a definition
yeah,
question.
because
We have to make
there's
sure it's
certain
properly
interpretations
defined.
of what.
but basically the definition is that is the person that is the hirer, the firer, all contracts and everything flow, they are executing everything to make the town run and manage and administer.
Well, that's like a COO of a corporation versus a CEO. So there's a CEO who tells the COO of the day-to-day, like, who runs the
Yeah.
day-to-day stuff, okay?
CEO,
The COO is not the CEO, like, they're not the policy
Yeah,
makers,
that's
they're not the, like, visionary, right?
Exactly.
And I'm sorry, I keep going back to business, but that's just,
Yeah,
The distinction in business is a little bit different for a
That's-
government.
that's
But-
where I'm
But
confused
that,
at.
the problem is the terms we use are kind of used in different realms, because in the you're right,
Yeah.
in the business sense,
It's
the
very-
CEO is the top person, but they're still a board of directors. But the CEO can have a CAO, a COO, Chief
Yes.
Organizational Officer, Chief Administrative Officer. It's just titles. For government, the main thing is a legislative body and the executive branch. For our federal government, it's the president of the executive branch, Congress, for the legislative body. So the Board of Selectmen in Simsbury is the Congress, the town manager is the president.
No.
The town
Wait a
manager is the White House, as a whole, excuse me.
yes,
So it's,
he is not elected.
excuse me, never mind.
We gotta look at that, cause
Yeah.
I hear what you're saying, but I'm not necessarily in agreement with what the roles of each can be within those titles.
Right.
And I think
Yeah.
that's what we've
Within the
gotta-
titles,
yeah.
okay.
But I think we need to think about that though in the way it's conveyed to the public.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because it's the public's understanding of that name and the role of that name that's important, because we can't assume that that,
Understand it from.
because we're talking about it.
We all
That's
don't
fine.
agree with it.
I'm glad you said that, because what I was gonna say is, I'm still not convinced we need to change any of these titles. I'm still, and my point, hold on, sorry, and my point is, again, well, kind of exactly what you said, if we just decide to call it a town council, for whatever reason, I'm still not convinced why we would wanna do that. The town is gonna think we're switching forms of government again.
Yes.
So if we go down
Yes.
that path, the education has gotta be immense.
Yeah.
Right, see, that's where I think you need to clarify some of these things
Mhm.
without blowing everything.
Totally,
Yeah, no,
Right, that's
absolutely.
right, that's
But
right.
to make
Exactly.
it clear, so those of us that have not spent years in the politics and in government,
But I think by adding
Can
the
understand that.
glossary of terms
yes,
to the charter,
will be a.
Definitions.
definitions, whatever you, I'm not a lawyer. Will help
You're right.
the general public understand
Who's
the
in charge?
meaning behind of that, because they really wanna understand who's in charge,
Mhm.
right?
That's right, that's right.
Who
And
do
this
I
is-
go to?
And this is the guide path for that.
Like if my sidewalk isn't shoveled, do I go to the town manager or do I call Wendy, okay?
In that example, it would be the town manager.
Right.
Because
But
they
but
oversee.
see, a lot of people
But
would
a lot
call
of
Wendy,
people-
Exactly,
so
yeah.
yes, we.
And that's the problem, that is the feature, of local government.
I know,
Yeah, sorry.
Steve wants to say something.
Or they're gonna call Steve.
Probably, unfortunately. I just wanted to reiterate that you met, with the first selectman as well as the town manager, and neither of them were clear on these roles of CEO.
Yes.
What was interpreted, and the town manager implied he was under the impression that it was more of what we are being referred to as the business definition. So that, and also even Franklin saying different parts of the community interpret.
Mhm.
Maybe you just scratch that three initials all together and come up with some more explicit descriptor. That's all I was saying, is even the people that CEO is applicable to, which is the first select person and town manager, even they're not clear
Yeah.
on the definition. So I just wanted to make sure.
Well, and I-
you
Thank
covered that.
We'll straighten-
No, it's a good point, because I also do think there's a lot of people who are in business who are interpreting those definitions differently because of
Business,
business world.
Yeah.
Is different than
government,
government.
agreed. Oh, sorry, we're not quite done yet.
Not quite done.
I apologize.
This point of clarification, per Connecticut general statutes, there needs to be someone designated as a chief executive officer.
Okay.
Just when we
Right.
talk to
Right.
the state.
Yep, that's fine.
Right, and that's where some of the town charters make the first select person the chief executive officer. And they still have a chief administrative officer to handle the hiring, the firing,
Yes.
and
The CEO.
and do all that.
Everything.
Okay,
Next thing on the agenda is the May 6th, 2025 minutes. You had comments?
I did propose a change, which I didn't bring with me.
I have the change here. I did not make copies for everybody, excuse me. I'm
It was
going,
not that significant, but I don't think it was accurate. that
It was
I-
on
Yeah,
page,
it was on page 2 of the
it was on
minutes.
page 2, it was line 88. And I believe Bert wanted to add the word information.
Well, that's a suggestion about the,
that's one of them, yes, for line 88, exactly. Provide such resources, comma, information. Well, analysis actually isn't clear. But Bert, basically, his comment was he wanted to add, if you actually, annoyingly, sorry, if you just look at the town charter with my comments, that is actually what the commission discussed. If we wanna just quickly look at that.
so I'm sorry, the suggestion I made as to adding the word information, that wouldn't be a change to the minutes.
You wanted to do it
That was part of discussion.
Yeah, that's just something to
Okay.
discuss. The change to the minutes I proposed had to do with the paragraph that cites my points and I didn't say that, the town manager,
Do you want your email?
well, this says he advises the town manager should operate under the Board of Selectmen with all members having the ability to communicate with them, but the first selectman should be the main point of contact, with their consultation being required before information is shared with the rest of the board. I guess I didn't mean that the the consultation with the first selectman should be a prerequisite to sharing information with the rest of the board. That's not accurate.
Bert just wanted to clarify his comments. Instead of saying the consultation of with the first selectman is required before information is given to the Board of Selectmen, he just wanted to clarify what he said was not that that person is a gatekeeper. He just wanted to mention that the town manager will not be considered to have discharged his or her responsibility to transmit information to the board. So meaning that he can still be communicating to the board if he talks to the first selectman.
I don't wanna get us hung up on this.
I'm sorry, I didn't print it out for
Maybe we should
everybody.
just,
You wanna just take out the word required?
Strike that clause about with their consultation being required. And I think it'll still catch the tenor of what I said.
Does anybody have any other changes?
So, subject to that, I'm,
Make a
yeah,
motion as amended.
yeah.
Have a second?
I second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Abstain.
We already planned the June 3rd meeting, because we just talked about that, but I do wanna bring something up about our meeting schedule, because it only goes through July. Okay, so we need to send out our famous doodle poll to all of you to find out when we're all available. May I make the suggestion that we take August off,
Yes, I'm in India.
because it's
When's the report due?
it's 16 months from the time we were charged. We
They
don't
wanted
know-
it
I
this
thought they
August.
wanted it
That's
for
what I
the
was
sake
asking.
of-
Okay.
They
Okay,
wanted
so
it by
so we're-
November.
So we're safe, okay.
Yeah.
What your recommendation is the first select woman instilled a deadline. I think Bob would, and I don't know, and I'm not sure, and I need to confirm with Bob, but statutorily,
It's 16
the
months.
Charter Revision Commission has more time.
Yes.
The first selectman's,
They
Wendy
wanted,
next to this is suggestion or recommend, however you wanna read her letter, she wanted the
it's
Charter
not gonna happen.
Revision Commission to have a draft report for August. We're in May.
It's not gonna happen.
We're
Yeah,
in May.
no,
And we have to have
take
public
Take
hearings.
August off.
Yeah, that's the
We're
issue.
required to have public hearings as well.
I
So-
want to be with my
Get the
grandmother.
referendum.
So,
To use a legal term, not a chance.
Pound sand.
So if I could just chime in, I think the onus was that Wendy was hoping that the existing board that convened this charter revision would be the ones that had the opportunity to vote on it. So I think the real deadline would be the elections, but I think she was reticent to run it that close that we wouldn't have time for our own public comment
well, and
and
we have to
such.
have public hearings.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We're required to
The
by law.
assumption was they'd have the timing to get it on.
Like we
Well,
did-
yeah,
election
not before the
cycle.
draft.
It's gotta go to referendum.
It's
Yeah.
gotta go to, we have to have public hearings before it can go to referendum.
Right, the draft was due in August.
Yeah, well, that's not gonna happen.
No, I know, but we didn't have to build in the public hearings
Right.
before August.
Yeah, no, but we still have to have
But there
public
would have-
hearings after.
I believe that the public hearing is required before the draft report is transmitted to the Board of Selectmen.
Yes,
I believe
Yes.
that's the.
You only have to have one public hearing.
Exactly. We had the one initial one before
we
you
have to have
begin
one
substantive
after
work
we
and then
write the draft.
one right after. And then, once you give it to the BOS, they have a chance to make any change. Send it back to you one last time for you to make any other changes that they say.
And will we need another public hearing after that?
No.
No,
I don't believe so.
If there was a lot of big changes.
Yeah, you have.
Not sure. Town attorney
Yeah.
I
Dickerson.
mean, you could if you wanted
if there
to.
was substantial changes,
If
maybe,
you
I don't
wanted
know.
to, you could do that. It's not
So-
required.
One last point,
Yeah.
I raised at the outset of this meeting the problem of a member of the Board of Selectmen catering our meeting when we're discussing the problem, the role of the Board of Selectmen. I think that problem goes away, the appearance of impropriety can be cured if he brings pizza to every meeting.
Might be the same pizzas.
Hawaiian.
Well, you know, the cheesecake is pretty good too.
Yeah, I didn't mean to limit it to pizza.
Beer too much to ask?
Gets better and
Careful
better.
what you wish for.
So we'll send out a doodle poll
Doodle poll for your,
for meeting
That's for the rest of the
dates
year.
Yeah.
As much as
for
possible.
September through the rest of the year.
And we're taking August
We're
off.
gonna take August off.
Okay.
I'm gonna have some conflicts in September and October, but I'm sure you all won't miss me.
Oh, come on.
I'm not calling you in from Hawaii or Italy, so.
Well then.
All right.
No,
Try
I
to figure out how to
did,
drive
he's
a
a
car.
president.
I'm pretty sure Paul wrote a
I didn't call
response
in,
at
but I wrote.
4
You
a.m.
I wrote it.
So I'll make sure I do that.
That's massive
Um,
voted memo.
Got the most important motion of the evening?
I move to adjourn.
Second?
Second.
Any opposed? All in favor? Aye. Thank you all for your
Oh, thank you.
hard work.
For over 40 years, SCM has been the voice of our town.
bringing us together through local programming,
Education.
And live broadcasts.
SEM isn't just about television.
It's about empowering our community.
Ensuring our voices are heard during government meetings.
and celebrating milestones.
like our high school graduations.
But today, SEM faces a challenge.
Our funding structure is based on television subscriptions. And it's no secret, people have been cutting the cord.
With a shift to internet-only subscriptions,
SEM receives less revenue.
Even though all our programming is freely available online.
We need your support.
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 Your donation can make a difference.
It will ensure that SCM remains open.
Continues to educate our youth and keeps our community informed.
Thanks to SEM, I've been honing my creative skills, helping me work towards my college degree.
SEM is crucial for keeping our community connected.
SCM isn't just here to broadcast local events. They're actually preserving Simsbury's history.
Join us in preserving Simsbury's voice.
Simsbury's voice.
Together we can ensure that SCM continues to thrive.
For generations to come.
Visit our website
Or scan the QR code on your screen to make your donation.
Every contribution
counts.
Thank you for supporting Simsbury Community Media.
where your town
Your schools
And your government come together.